I'll make sure I'm in line.
On that trip. Oh my God, school trip. No one was on a field trip, you know.
Okay.
We social engineering. You know how you hack, you go, I just have to have fun.
Okay. There we go. All right, so I have transitioned to the state of sickness where I am 100% better, and yet I sound terrible, and I got a bad vocal fry. So last week I was getting really hoarse at the end of class. We'll see how we do here, but I might, if I start to lose my voice after today and tomorrow, might come up with something different for Wednesday or something. I'll keep you updated on Canvas, but whatever it is, we'll figure it out. So we were going to cover constitutional, like basically obscenity and free speech on the internet and all that this week, but I decided to move some things around. I feel like I need another week with that topic because there's some things happening. I want to see if anything happens in the next week or so, just so you know, I don't want to tell you something and then next week, you know, we find out what happened and it turns out. So instead, we're going to move that back a week and we move up this one. We're going to talk about social engineering. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more than that. So this unit is social engineering vector attacks, but just in general, manipulating people. And that does actually include training people. Whenever we train people in our environment to not do things that cause us to have security incidents, we are trying to manipulate them. We're trying to influence them into doing the right thing or the thing that we want them to do. And this also leads into later units. We are going to talk about misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and that kind of thing, which of course is also influencing humans on a larger scale. And that's actually where we're going to get started. Because everyone, of course, is familiar with certain things, with being manipulated, sure, regardless of how independent you may consider yourself to be, how single-minded and immune to social pressures. I can guarantee by the time that you get to this stage in your life, you have most certainly faced at least thousands of attempts to influence your own behavior, right? It all starts at a very young age where parents try to raise us to be good citizens, at least whatever their version of that happens to be, one degree or another. We, of course, have peer pressure from our friends in school and all of that. And there is just a general pressure, of course. We talked about a couple of weeks ago. We talked about nonconformity and mainstream culture and how you can fall in with subcultures and develop social bonds thanks to shared experiences within that culture. But even within those subcultures, there is a pressure to conform. And then there, of course, is overarching pressure to conform to mainstream culture on top of that, which is why belonging to a subculture reinforces those bonds, so on and so forth. And you'll no doubt be familiar with common propaganda techniques. You'll see them all over the internet these days, like your gatekeeping. You see a post on Twitter from one of the developers of the PlayStation 5, happens to be a woman, goes out to GameStop wearing her Sony PlayStation shirt, and is questioned whether or not she even plays PlayStation, even know what that is, kind of a thing. Gatekeeping that hobby, like you can't be a real fan here if you don't know every single one of this band's songs. If you can't quote the lines from the movie by heart, that kind of thing. It happens all the time. Gatekeeping, stereotyping, unquestioned belief, and so on. And we did talk about 1984. If you haven't read it, you're at least familiar with the topic itself, and most likely familiar with the concept of groupthink and doublespeak and so on and so forth. Concepts which, when conceived by George Orwell, were mostly fictional, but as we'll talk about in just a moment, hardly new topics and hardly new in our age either, although the ubiquity and reach of the internet does mean that that is spreading farther and wider and faster than was ever previously possible. And it's easier to do that with, for example, the characteristics we talked about, characteristics of online interaction, that pseudo-anonymity, constant connectivity, and so on. allows greater manipulation on a greater scale, right? When we get to misinformation, we'll talk about the illusion of anonymity and the illusion of power. I'm sorry, not anonymity, unanimity, illusion of unanimity, which we see all the time, catfishing. It's everyone on the internet, or on the internet, no one knows you're a dog kind of a situation. Well, on the internet, nobody knows that the 80 people who just replied to your post and upvoted it are actually all you. And of course, everyone is familiar with manipulative language, emotional appeals, testimonials, circular logic, and so on. The impulse to dive into this unit and just talk about logical fallacies is great for me, I admit, because it's really interesting the way that we are able to subtly manipulate conversations just with a turn of phrase or something like that. But ultimately, I decided it is a bit beyond the scope of this. If you're interested in that, I recommend taking some rhetoric classes in the philosophy department. But interesting nonetheless. And it's impossible to talk about this without mentioning some of them. So we'll at least get a taste. Now, we're going to start by talking about mass manipulation. And we'll go into greater detail on that later. But for now, essentially, what you need to know is that it really kind of starts with this guy. So we will talk in greater detail about this gentleman over here later. But essentially, this is Baines, and he's considered to be the father, not of modern propaganda per se, but of modern mass media manipulation. And of course, none of us are happy with advertisements. None of us are happy with being manipulated. We don't like it. But this gentleman here, Baines, did not set out to sort of establish or destroy Western civilization. They simply saw that there was an opportunity and wrote the outline for it, literally the book. Now, the outcome of that, again, just like all things technology being completely morally neutral, could be set to what could be considered undesirable aims or even destructive aims on a global scale. Because Baines, who initially wrote his work on mass media manipulation, it was quite popular at the time. And there were some people who were quite taken with it. Among those would be your ad agency type executives who eventually were able to see the fruits of the labor when actually put into practice, but also those who would later on go to become influential in the Third Reich. Essentially, what we're talking about here is that human beings on an individual level are, as I've said before, terrifying creatures. Filthy, greasy things, foul-mouthed, best left far alone to their own devices. And yet they are a system. We work off of systems individually, right? We have our own languages, our own cultures, our own likes, our own dislikes. We have our own things that we are repulsed by and attracted to and so on. And those are systems. And systems can be gamed, systems can be manipulated, systems can be played with. I mean, we're not necessarily talking about in a Machiavellian sense here, manipulating people in order to get what you want. I mean, you will unintentionally manipulate people all the time just because you want them to like you. All of us want people to like us. We all want security and acceptance and so on. And so, even on a subconscious level, we may play a little bit with their systems in order to get that. Tell a joke, right? People like people who tell jokes. Human beings, taken in aggregate, are far less unpredictable. As a matter of fact, on an aggregated level, our behavior as human beings is shockingly predictable. Shockingly predictable. But that said, we are also very malleable, which means groups of people are subject to manipulation, but they're also subject to being manipulated in the other direction because we tend to be very mercurial, even as a group. Individuals can be very stubborn and very obstinate. It takes a lot of work to convince a person to do something, especially something they don't necessarily want to do. Like, for example, when police are interrogating an individual, they want them to confess to a crime. The person knows that if they confess to the crime, that's basically it, and they're going to be going to jail for a really long time. So how do they extract a confession? Well, not by peer pressure. They don't go, hey, all your friends are confessing. Cool guys confess to murders. You want to be a cool guy, don't you? What they do is they exert very specific pressure on human systems. Like, we have some weaknesses. We need to sleep, so don't let them sleep. Can't not feed and water them, but you can give them crap for food, right? You could run out to Burger King and get them a Whopper. As a matter of fact, sometimes the police will run out to Burger King and get them a Whopper if they think it will help get them on their side. But if they're being obstinate, cold ham sandwich out of the vending machine, absolute bare minimum. Psychological pressure, simple things like having them sit in the corner of the room away from the exit so that the officers can sit between them and the door, sending the psychological message that in order to get out, it's through them. Things like that. Very specific, hard tactic type pressures. Whereas human beings as a group are far more malleable, right? Baines, over here, one of his claims to fame before his work was truly accepted, he was in advertising. And at the time, and this is in the 20s, so, well, the teens and 20s, so just about 100 years ago or so. And at the time, if you go back and you look at any advertisements of those days, they're going to be really strange to us now because this changed the face of everything. They're very matter of fact. They're always like, buy Marlboros, they're better tobacco. It's a cleaner smoke. But there was a competing brand with really popular brands of the day, cigarettes, that is, an upstart known as Lucky Strike. And they were having a hard time breaking into the market because there were already so many established brands out there, and cigarettes, tobacco at the time, was considered, it's a masculine thing, so men are the only ones that smoke, and they tend to be brand loyal, right? So Lucky Strike, trying to break into this market, they hire this guy, okay? And he comes up with an idea. He says, I think I know how we can get at least something. Well, first of all, his first brilliant idea was smoking is considered a masculine thing, but we can expand the market if we market to women, right? And this is the 1920s. He sees there's a social movement, suffrage movement, right? Suffragettes are taking to the street, demanding the right to vote. So what does he do? Does he start doing what other brands of the day are doing and start coming out with advertisements and magazines and grocers worldwide, basically saying, you know, here's a woman's testimonial. I really enjoy this tobacco and I want to vote. Please give me civil rights. No, he doesn't do that because that would lead to backlash, right? Menfolk didn't want to see that kind of thing. And brands that attempted it were usually punished because at the time, you know, women were mostly homemakers and so on. There was very little opportunity for them. They didn't have the right to vote, for fuck's sake. So if they faced backlash, social backlash, they would be more or less ostracized by the primary consumers of the day. So instead, what does he do? Well, he links up with some suffragettes just prior to their marching in a parade in New York, one that they had been planning and working towards for months, one that they had advertised that they knew would draw both supporters and detractors alike. And he says, you know what? If you really want to send a message to men, head out there in Times Square, spark up a cigarette in front of them. That'll show them that's what men do. And they did. And Lucky Strike quickly became the most popular brand amongst women. And shortly after that, the most popular brand amongst men, because guess what? Men weren't doing the shopping and they didn't really care at the end of the day what they were smoking. Just a little push in the right place at the right time. And you can manipulate a system. Now, this is obviously not new. We've been doing this for years and years. Propaganda is exactly what I'm talking about. As I said, the Third Reich took Bainesian philosophy and they used it for their own ends. And I would say it was pretty effective. But we used it too, right? At the time, and this of course is many years after Baines had written the work, it took that long really to catch on. So the teens, 20s, into the 30s, the rise of the Third Reich, 30s and 40s, FDR becomes convinced, or people within the administration become convinced, and they start adopting it as well. And it just takes a little push. The question isn't what do you want to say? The question is, how do you say it? Say it in just the right way. So we began to see a certain kind of messaging start to take over, right? Playing on emotional appeals, right? What motivates people? One of the hardest things that you can convince a human being to do is to go to war and kill other human beings they don't even know. It's really hard to do. Just ask the military right now with their recruiting issues, right? So what do? Well, you don't go over there and you say, hey, you feel like murdering Germans? I got just the place for you. Maybe you heard about it. Instead, what you do is you play on people's pride. What will your children think of you if you don't do this? Will you have to admit to your children that you were a coward? If you don't fight, your children will have to do it instead. In this case, we're not even asking you to fight, something much easier. We're not asking you to kill anybody. Just buy the war bonds. And even over here with this wonderful LGBT couple and their adopted daughter. I assume that's what this is anyway. But again, the children, think of the children, a better future for them. Actually, this last weekend on Friday, the war in Ukraine took an unusual turn, although not entirely unexpected. There were some referenda that were held in Soviet-held parts of Ukraine, and they, of course, voted to become part of the Russian Federation once again. And Putin, in his address on Friday, gave a speech about Russian sovereignty and stuff. It wasn't really all that surprising. But if you look at the content of his speech, what he actually said, was he talking about what's going on in Ukraine? Not so much. It didn't really even seem to be about Ukraine. What was it about? The West. The West is threatening us. They want to destroy us. He mentioned just about every atrocity the West has committed, and the West being generally anything west of Russia. So he was laying at the feet of Western imperialism, not just the United States, but the UK and the activities in colonized Africa and India and so on and so forth. But, and somehow also the fact that the West generally recognizes multiple genders is also somehow, anyway, that was part of his speech anyway. It was clear who his audience was, is what I'm getting at. And it was really about this, it's about survival. It's about the beginning and the end. It's about the children. And certain imagery we saw being more effective than others. For example, those that specifically call to action, which is still used today, right? If you've ever done any research on the success of social media, if you've ever wanted to be a successful social media influencer, so one thing they always say that you've got to include, and you've got to include it in the right place, the call to action. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, favorite, share, forward, etc. Well, that's exactly what we see here. I want you. And this even predates the Second World War. Over here, almost the exact same thing in Russian. T, up at the top, means you. And what about other audiences, right? Audiences that may otherwise be reticent to do what is necessary, right? Reluctant to let their sons and husbands go off the foreign soil to kill people they don't know for a cause they don't truly understand. Or to go to work, which at the time, counter to everything they had been told about what it is to be feminine and so on. Well, you got to cater to them too. And what do we see? Think of the children again. Think of how proud you'll be, the job they have to do, and simply, we can do it. As if no one had ever told them before. The effectiveness of this kind of propaganda can't be understated. Oh, and by the way, if you're interested in the subject, there once was a professor here, which I believe who has since retired, over in poli-sci. I'm not sure, she might actually still be here, but Susan Brown, over here in the poli-sci department, wrote a very excellent book called Why We Fight, all about propaganda. Can't recommend it enough. So these are still going on. I'm not going to show you every advertisement you've ever seen, but from now on, whenever you see an advertisement, just take a second and just think about what it might be trying to say. Some advertisements these days the Bayesian philosophy, I'm not going to lie, since the 70s has gone off the goddamn rails. Just insane a lot of the time. Like Cadbury in the 1980s for their new larger chocolate bar had an advertisement featuring a drummer in a gorilla suit playing the opening beats to In the Air Tonight. And then it just said Cadbury. What the hell, man? I don't know what that has to do with chocolate, but whatever. Point is, they're just looking for the next thing to get attention, because it's all about attention. This is the attention economy. And that's why it's so important that if you do have a message worth conveying, you have to cut through the information seeking systems. You got to cut through that Brave New World-esque signal to noise. We talked about data, information, knowledge, and wisdom platforms. If you have information, you got to make sure it cuts through. And so that's why these are examples of terrible propaganda for cybersecurity. Just awful. This one over here on the far left. Don't get hooked, think before you click. That's not bad. It's yellow. That's attention grabbing. Although we tend to associate yellow with, warning signs and stuff, and we tend to actually, there have been studies done of heat mapping and colors. Yellow draws the eye, but psychologically we tend to be avoidant of it. It's a stimulating color, and if it's not an actual warning, then we tend to get kind of miffed about it, like, what the hell, this is not important information for me. But it is stimulating, which is why so many fast food chains, McDonald's and so on, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, and so on, use yellow. So that part's okay, but who the hell is gonna see that poster and walk all the way up there and take a look at this size 4-point font sitting here? Nobody. What does it convey any meaningful information other than that? Don't get hooked. Think before you click. I guess, but it's not very effective, at least not as effective as it could be. Information security is as simple as ABC, always be careful. Very helpful advice. You want to avoid getting murdered? Don't get murdered. That's basically what that is, right? You want to be safe? Just be safe. Or like this monstrosity over here on the right-hand side, this abomination of design and principle, form and function. Where do you even start? This is definitely an example of a poster that is too busy. Here are some examples of better posters. Certainly not the best, but better ones, because they are simple, to the point. They actually convey something that is useful. Do not open unknown files that end in .exe. Last week, we took a look at the evolution of a message as it devolved into basically grunts, monosyllabic sentences, so that even the absolute basest among us would be able to understand the instructions that started out with, do not put the cart on the escalator, it is for the elevator only, and then followed by, don't use escalator, use elevator, and then finally just elevator only, right? Simple, it's gotta be simple. Convey information right away. A graphic, like the bear trap, conveys danger, don't step here, bad things happen. Spiky, we talked about spikiness before as well. Oh wait, sorry, that was 226, whatever. So do not open files that end in .exe. It's not going to tell you everything you need to know, but we're not trying to educate people entirely with a poster. It's a single, simple message. Are you protected? Install AV, run your AV, do it regularly. Social engineering, and honestly, this is probably the worst among the two, or the three rather, simply because it's almost overly simplistic, has the same problem with the yellow and everything. But at least when you see it, you're likely to be disarmed because it's at least silly, right? But simple messages with easy refrains. Like this is basically saying the same thing as that, but that I'm aware of, and I didn't live through World War II. Loose lips sink ships. Everyone's heard that. It's a nice, easy refrain. Tells you exactly what you need to know. Keep your fucking mouth shut. Private information is worth keeping hidden. Protect your personal information, change passwords often, lock your computer. Cybersecurity is up to you. This isn't a bad poster, but it's definitely not as catchy. People aren't going to remember it as much. So sometimes, for example, that poster we saw with all that text on it, you might be saying to yourself, my God, how did that ever get out of the design process? Well, the reason most likely, and you can tell just from looking at it, is probably something known as the Abilene Paradox, AKA the horse designed by committee, the camel phenomenon. Essentially, whenever you're looking at a message, it's very rarely a single person's message. It's usually gone through a couple of revisions, a couple of provisos, quid pro quos, etc. It's been designed by committee. And so when you see something like that, usually what you're looking at is basically a compromise between those individuals, right? Individually, a single person doesn't really have all that much ability to influence the outcome of things. But collectively, and this is also a social manipulation issue here, usually in groups that are designing something like this, one or two strong personalities will emerge. They might faction off for a while, and eventually what they produce tends to be a compromise between the two factions more than anything else. It's very rare in creative spaces to actually have true collaboration in that fashion. It's just the way we're designed, right? We just tend to go along with stronger personalities because they seem to have it figured out. And of course, everyone wants to be liked. Now, once in a while also, you'll see bad propaganda for cybersecurity put out there simply because it's not really seen as an important thing, right? It's just a compliance check mark. So sometimes you'll just see, well, like for example, something like this or something like this. They strike me very much as posters that were put up just so that they could say they did, right? They get to check it off of their social engineering playbook checklist, right? We put up posters. And that's fine. I've been there, you know. I've been in situations where either you just recommend that you do some kind of awareness posters or even just needed to put some up at the last minute and didn't really have time to design anything really well. So it's fair, but at the same time, I hope that I have just conveyed to you that if applied appropriately, simple things like that can be extremely effective and very important. Most of the focus in the field of cybersecurity is on compliance, as far as social engineering goes, or on training, which is fine. We'll talk about effective training, but you're not doing everything you can. You're missing a big piece of the picture, because if you train, usually what you're doing is users are training to a test. And just like with studying to a test, you learn enough to pass the test and you forget everything right away. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about behavioral schemas, right? The idiosyncrasies, personality quirks, characteristics that we sort of develop as coping mechanisms in order to effectively survive in unfamiliar situations. So you develop your child persona, you develop your employee persona, your teacher persona, your partner persona, and so on and so forth. Every situation you're going to develop one or the other. If you find yourself in a new situation, let's say you're shopping at a new store you're unfamiliar with. Well, if you've never gone shopping yourself before, you're going to feel pretty lost and overwhelmed. Those are big places. But if you have been a consumer at other stores, department stores, then you simply are able to apply psychologically your consumer or your shopper persona, and you find it a little bit more comfortable to get around. I know it's maybe difficult to conceive of that because we develop so many different behavioral schemas throughout our life, and we apply them subconsciously. But if you can imagine yourself, if you've ever been in a truly unique situation, if any of you live in the dorms, for example, if you think about what a culture shock it was to suddenly be away from home, suddenly be on your own in the dorms, responsible for getting yourself to class, for finishing your own homework, and so on. I can't relate to that because I never developed that schema. I never did that. I was a non-traditional student. I was working full time. I lived off campus. But I can tell you that when it comes to the schema that is working 3 jobs back to back on a long weekend or something like that, yeah, I can relate to that. I have a schema for that. It's called bring my laptop and read a book or something. So it may be difficult to conceive of, but try to put yourself in that position if you can. And if you train employees to just take the test and pass the test, that's just compliance. Because as soon as they leave, as soon as they're out of that room, as soon as they're done with a test, as soon as they're at home, they're no longer applying that schema. They're in a completely different situation. And you might find, as we'll talk about when we get to security engagements and assessments, that someone's schema, when they're in their receptionist mode, is far more helpful than their scores might otherwise lead you to believe. All right, so one of the primary subjects, I guess, of this unit for us is Kevin Mitnick, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago, if you recall from the 90s. He was one of the first solo, well, he didn't work entirely solo, but for the most part, he was kind of a lone wolf in the stuff that he did. But one of those early 90s hackers, the first ones really that transitioned from just kind of being curious and trespassing and occasionally accidentally breaking things and maybe taking a couple things here and there to actually turning it into a criminal enterprise, to actually living off of his ill-gotten gains. He was arrested. And when he got out, he contributed to the field of cybersecurity in a number of different ways, but what he's mostly known for these days is exactly what we're talking about here. For all Kevin Mitnick knew about computer systems and how to do some really cutting edge stuff at the time, to be perfectly honest with you, he knew that really at the end of the day, it wasn't so much about the technical stuff as it was the people. As he says, you can spend a fortune purchasing technology and services and your network infrastructure could still remain vulnerable to old-fashioned manipulation. And in fact, on Canvas, we are going to be taking a peek at this, but there is a PDF for The Art of Deception, which is a book he wrote on this subject. 2 point, oh look, it's 420 pages, how about that? I mean, oops, it seems as if I may have inadvertently uploaded the whole book. I apologize, I'll have to fix that later. So we are going to be referring to his book, a couple of points, and most of what we're talking about here is going to be things that he didn't, social engineering, there's many specialties in cybersecurity and specialties within penetration testing. I'm not really the greatest expert on social engineering. My primary interests in terms of my specialties and research are forensics. And when I was a pen tester, I tended to gravitate more towards covert entry, which did require some social engineering, but you know, it was really just finding creative ways to defeat locks and security systems and doors and whatnot. So, I mean, I'm certainly well-versed enough, I think, to teach you about this, but I would say that there are other people out there who truly specialize in social engineering as a skill. Kevin Mitnick is certainly one of those. The Art of Deception is a great book on that, and there's also Hacking Humans, which is, I can't remember his name right now, but is another excellent book on the subject. All right, so what social engineering is as an attack vector is essentially when an attacker applies social pressure in some way in order to gain information. There's various different ways that one can do that. And you, if there's always one or two every semester, if you're one of the students who happens to be thinking, wait a second, aren't hackers computer nerds? Don't they not have social skills? Yes, that is true. But there is a big difference between being good with people and being good at people. There's a big difference between those two things, which is why for short-term engagements, if you're thinking about just manipulating people, it is something that most people can really, it's a skill most people can really develop. You know, this isn't 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or how to make friends and influence people. This isn't that. I'm not gonna sit here and try and teach you how to be a, the fuck is that, Toastmaster or something like that? Something like that. A master of ceremonies. That's not gonna happen. But social engineering can be applied pretty much by anybody under the right circumstances, because again, we're talking short-term engagements. We're talking about essentially pre-planned engagements even. Social engineering is so easy that it is the main way in which most systems are compromised. It is the main way in which wire fraud is facilitated. It's the main way in which most scams run. So it's all really about just adopting that persona, right? Trying to get into that behavioral schema, the behavioral schema of social manipulation. It's possible to do with practice. Generally, when we're talking about like covert entry stuff, most of the time that is at some point going to require some more advanced skills, like for example, actually impersonating somebody or making friends with them or even intimidating them. For example, 2 different engagements that I was on previously. One of them was a bank in Milwaukee. The second one, a hospital in Minneapolis. For the bank job, as we called it, we went in, myself and a partner, we impersonated IT. We had false badges that we had, and we actually put the Microsoft logo on them. So we go in, we're wearing Microsoft badges. We tell them that we got a call. We had done a little bit of reconnaissance before that, and this was many, many years ago. So, well, anyway, point is, we did a little reconnaissance at first, and we learned that this is a branch office, headquarter office. Looked in the directory, we found the name of somebody who looked like they had an important title. We go in there, we say, John Doe, Vice President of IT, called us. He said that there's a problem with one of your terminals. And they said, no, we're fine. So, well, we have the machine name here. Can we come in and take a look? Of course, they let us through. We talk our way into it. We had a USB flash drive at the time that just simply had a script on it so that when we ran the script, it looked like, oh, a pop-up, you got a virus. Look, our scanner says so. And of course, they say, I'm sorry, we can't let you do anything to that terminal. We have to call and verify. And so we had to apply an intimidation tactic. So I carried with me one of those foldable metal clipboards, pulled out a piece of paper that we had pre-printed that had the scariest possible language, refusal of service. And I was like, well, that's fine, but I'm not telling John Doe VP that we left here without fixing this thing because this is a major security risk. So you sign this, you're accepting responsibility for this, right? They didn't know anything about it, so they signed. We can get on with our work. The hospital job was a little bit different, right? We, again, IT people had our Microsoft badges, managed to get into the public area, right, just by walking in because it's a hospital. Managed to get into some of the back hallways, but we couldn't get into the room that we were contracted to try and enter. So rather than pushing our luck and actually trying any other covert entry stuff because it was the middle of the day. There were people everywhere. Instead, what we did is went outside to the smoking area. Nurses love to smoke, ironically enough. So we go outside and we're having some BS conversation that I can't remember. It was something that was just total patter. But it was, something like talking about vacation or something like that. Anyway, over here, a conversation a couple of nurses are happen to have, join in there. And then at one point, my partner's like, oh, I just remembered there's one more in the back room that we have to get to. And, at that point, 15 minutes or so of conversation, they were more than happy to help us out, right? To help us get on our way. So making friends and intimidation. Don't try this on your friends. Actually, you're all welcome because so occasionally we get a chance to interact with what do they call them, instructional designers for these courses. And when I was developing the graduate version of this for the UWEX program, we got to this unit, and of course they were like, "Oh man, this is awesome stuff. Can we have students like social engineer each other?" And I was like, "No, we can't, because it doesn't work that way." And also, no. So no, we're not going to do anything like that. Just don't do this. All right. And also, this is an iterative process, right? Social engineering, just like any kind of penetration testing, any kind of black box testing, you don't know what you're working with. And people are all black boxes until you start to probe them for information, right? I mean, you may look at somebody and you might think you know everything about them. You size them up and you know what buttons to press and stuff, but you don't really know until you start interacting. It's an iterative process. Sometimes a person doesn't know everything, and sometimes they're only willing to tell you so much and you don't want to push it. So it's an iterative process in that you get a little bit of information and then you build off it, right? Now, the problem on the blue team side is that social engineering is extremely hard to combat. because we can patch systems, but we can't patch people. All we can do is try to train people. And our training, as I mentioned only moments ago, and probably several times already this summer, because I tend to say it a lot, is woefully inadequate for this main attack vector. Almost every major breach in one way or another relays back to social engineering. Human beings are the weakest link in any security system. And it can be the trickiest to exploit, but if you know the right pattern, you're looking at the right person, it's doable with very little training is what I'm getting at. So we're looking at an attack where an attacker has to make a very low investment on the attack for a very high return potential. And one of the reasons why training is so woefully inadequate is because of the way we do it. It's normally just a compliance check. We're not really thinking about effective messaging. We're not really thinking about brass tacks. What is the one thing that you can say? If somebody walks away with one piece of information, what's the single most effective thing that they can know? Instead, we train to the, okay, you're going to watch a 30-minute video. You're going to take a 10-question quiz. Don't worry, you only have to get 70% to pass because check. And we never talk about things that actually matter, that relate to people. Everyone in here has had to take one of these security awareness, right? I would be very surprised if you hadn't had to do one of these. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We don't individualize, we don't personalize, we don't tell people what they need to know. And most importantly, we almost never touch on the ethical perspective here. Because most of the time when social engineering attacks occur and are successful, it's usually because somebody bent the rules somewhere, right? They gave someone they liked a little bit more access than they thought they might need. They might have gotten angry at somebody, right? And they wanted to get back at them, show them what a big shot they are, you know? You know, you tease your sibling or something like that, and you're doing a chore you don't want to do, you huck fin them, right? You're like, I bet you can't even do the dishes. You're so weak. You don't even know what you're doing here, huh? What are you doing? Just, you think you could do the dishes? Really? Prove it, right? So ethics is almost never part of it, but it really ought to be, because most of the time that's really the problem, right? Because we want to be helpful, so we'll bend the rules. All right, so at a top level, there's two main different angles of attack when it comes to social engineering attacks: pretexting and pretensing. Of the two, pretexting is generally the one that is talked about the most, and also a lot of books on the subject will call pretexting, will basically use the same term for both of these. So I guess your mileage may vary, but in my opinion, pretexting and pretensing are separate things entirely. So pretexting, the one most common, the one that you hear about the most, is just simply concocting a false narrative. You're concealing the truth, right? Like if I walk in and I say I'm with Microsoft IT, I'm here to fix one of your computers, it says it has a virus on it, that's a pretext. I don't work for Microsoft, there is no virus, none of that is true. But pretensing is where you have a seed of truth, you're just stretching it. My example here, an alcoholic goes to see their sponsor and they say, no, I haven't had any whiskey today, it's fine. You know, but they've been drinking vodka all morning, that would be pretensing. Or you know, if I were in an engagement like that bank job, and instead of impersonating Microsoft IT, if I go in there and I say, you know, I give them my real name. Hi, I'm Chad. I'm with Red Team Alliance. We're here to conduct a pen test. I'm just here to do a preliminary survey. Nothing to worry about. I just want to know what we're working with. They're like, oh yeah, okay, sure. And I just walk around, you know, and I see, oh, okay. I know exactly where all the cameras are. I know exactly where the back door is. I can see that you know, you're using the old quick set from Walmart on the back door. I'm pretensing. It's not a lie. I'm just also doing other things while I'm there, like my job. So pretexting, just a form of social engineering. You focus on creating a good pretext. There's a term for this, and of course, when we're talking about social engineering, obviously, it predates computers and all of that. Pretexting is just the old confidence scams, right? So a good pretext might also be considered a good legend, as the old nomenclature goes. Something that you can use to get information. Now, a good pretext and a convincing attack, of course, a workable pretext will allow you to do what you want to do. But a great pretext and a successful attack will convince other people to do things for you on your behalf, which is even better. It's a layer of abstraction. Now, the problem is that pretexting usually requires interaction with the target at some point. How much interaction depends on what you want, the methods that you're using, the person that you're dealing with. But it does require. So basically what I'm saying is if you're going to social engineer, you are going to have to deal with people. I know it's terrible, but that's just the way it is. And a good pretext can be harder still to defend against, because if you train somebody, as some places do, if you train somebody to try and poke holes in someone's story, feel them out, see if they're telling the truth, a good pretext will survive that attack. As a matter of fact, before we get to these calls here, I may return to this book, The Art of Deception. So this book includes some recounts of some various different attacks. Long story short, this is a national bank in Britain where they use this system. So they build upon success, they build upon success. The first call was to Kim. Do you guys use credit checks? Yes. When you phone into credit checks, do you call the number you give them? Isn't it a merchant ID? She waits. Is this important information? Is this something that should be protected? Have I received training about this? Is this an attack of some kind? Because Kim, I'm working on a book. It deals with private investigations. Yes, she said, answering the question. So the attacker in this case could sense that pause, could sense that there was consideration on the other line. And so what are they waiting for? What do they need to be convinced? Well, they just need a solid pretext, right? A good reason why somebody, an innocent reason why somebody would be asking a question like that. And of course, we always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. We want to assume that their intentions are good. And in this case, they've stated they're working on a book. Okay, that sounds fine. Yes, it's called a merchant ID. And besides, is that really important information? It's not like they're asking for a merchant ID. They just want to know if it's called that. So they didn't push it, and they made a second call to another person, this time Chris. Hi, Chris, this is Alex. I'm a customer service rep with Credit Checks. We're doing a survey to improve our services. Can you spare me a couple of minutes? So a different pretext in this case, pretending to be a customer service agent. What are the hours of your branch? How many employees does your branch use our service? How often do you call us with an inquiry? Which of our 800 numbers have we assigned to you for calling us? Have our representatives always been courteous? How's your response time? So on and so forth. None of this seems like very important information, but it's snowballing. They're getting more and more information about their potential target. They're not touching a computer here. They're calling on the phone. Maybe they're calling voice over IP or something, whatever. Point is that they're not out there looking for public exploits. And then they call again, and then they call again, and so on and so forth, building upon their information over and over until eventually they manage to get what they want to get. And all it requires is a good pretext, a good reason for asking, because we always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, obviously, if I haven't made it clear, this is not something that you ought to do just for fun. And it is something that is done all the time in crimes. Some, in my opinion, of the most despicable kinds of crimes. Why does it do this every time? All semester long, can't open links in the presentation.
This is Chief Investigator Sharon White. Yes, Investigator Sharon White. I am investigating a criminal complaint that has reported here in the office against you by cash trust. We are in the process of proceeding against you legally. Now, prior to putting this to your local authorities and returning an additional warrant for your arrest, I did want to contact you, did a statement, find out exactly what.
Sorry, I mean, move over here so you can get the subtitles.
You did walk into their facility to obtain a payday loan. You did give them your personal checking information along with a data so when they can extract the funds to be paid back for the loan. Once they went to receive the funds were not available. Now, they did make several attempts to try to contact you to rectify it. They sent it to 3 different collection agencies. They also made the attempts to try to rectify it, received no resolution. So they did transfer your file to my office. I can let me go ahead and proceed legally. Now, prior to reporting, like I said, to your local authorities, we did want to contact you, get a statement, find out exactly what was going on and what your intentions on trying to rectify it now that you are aware of the issues here.
Okay, so rectify means what?
Well, I mean, of course, the whole is going from one legal, you know, they want to.
Okay.
However, you
So
have,
what amount is it?
you have a balance of $819.
Okay, at this moment right now, I'm not working.
Well, see, with that being said, I would have no choice but what is Los Angeles County. However, Los Angeles County will issue you with a warrant for your arrest. It will be for a depository check fraud as well as theft by theft.
Is there any payments that I can do?
They will willing to set you up on a payment arrangement. However, they require that you come up with a down payment of at least half of your balance. And then what we'll do is make an arrangement with you on the remaining portion of the balance. However, that will go ahead and get it put on hold. It will avoid all legal items.
Okay, so let me do that then, because I don't want none of those. Right now, I'm actually pregnant, so I can't be going through stuff like this.
Right. Hold on.
I'm actually 8 months, I turn 8 months next week. So
Hold for a moment, let me talk with you, okay?
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, grab your checking information and you let me know when you're ready. Send you out a letter. Once you receive that letter, you have 2 hours to contact me back. If I do not hear from you within those 2 hours, at that time, I will take it as a refusal to rectify on a voluntary basis. I will go ahead and sign off on it. The attorney will go ahead and at that time forward the Los Angeles County for a warrant to be issued for your arrest.
I'm not trying to say that I'm not gonna pay that, I'm not gonna pay, I'm just, I want to know that I'm gonna do this correctly, because I don't want it to backfire me and then you come and tell me another thing. So,
It's debit, credit, or check, whichever way works best.
okay.
Okay, and good luck to you.
It's from the FBI's own YouTube channel, by the way. They do have one. They post stuff like that sometimes. Truly despicable. Obviously, a pregnant woman without any money lost her job. That was not, by the way, an actual law enforcement agent at all. It was complete bull in that story. But it was a good pretext. Why is it a good pretext? Because nobody wants to go to jail. Over $800. And if they're willing to, oh, by the way, if anyone ever calls you and they're like, oh yeah, you did an illegal thing, but it's okay, we'll put it on layaway for you, just make payments. That's not how that works. Well, that's an example of what we call a hard tactic, right? It's a hard tactic because there's a lot of psychological pressure. There's a lot of do this now or something terrible is going to happen to you. But there are other tactics. And we're going to explore some of those, but a soft tactic, one that's very common, older than time itself, most likely, is the honeypot or catfishing. Everyone here is familiar with catfishing, right? Comes from a show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You ever heard of it? There's an episode in which the gang, as they are known, is interacting in various ways with people online, mostly antisocial. I think that's the name of the episode even. But it turns out that one of the characters has been communicating not with Carl Undergard, the Olympian rower, but instead some other woman goes by the name Catfish. And that's where the term comes from. All right, before we get into more of the tactics though, some ways that you come across social engineering. Some various different technical mechanisms, I suppose you could say, in terms of tactics. So of course, everyone's familiar with phishing, the most common social engineering attack. It's just basically you send out in a phishing attack as many emails as you can. The law of averages dictates that even if 99% of people will just destroy it or not respond, then that 1% will, and that's usually all you need. Right? This university has 8,000 students and about 2,500 faculty and staff, so about 10,000 users total. If we get hit with a phishing attack, and we have multiple times, then if 99% of people ignore it, but 1% respond, that's still a pretty good return on what is essentially, again, a very low investment attack. It takes virtually nothing to send out a phishing message, especially since our email addresses are available to the public. Well, and of course, it gets more sophisticated. It doesn't have to be email. You can do what's known as vishing or smishing or whatever other prefix you want for various different technologies. Smishing is SMS, so texting. I don't know. I've been getting a lot of those lately. I don't know about you guys. I ended up on a dummy list somewhere, probably when I was researching this to update the slides. But yeah, I'm getting all kinds of maybe it's the election season. I don't know. Or vishing for phone calls and whatnot. You also have a more sophisticated version of phishing, right? You can invest more time in a phishing attack in order to increase your return on investment. We call that spear phishing. It's where you take information you already have available to you and tailor a phish, add some verisimilitude in order to make it more likely that the victim will fall for it. And of course, there's another term as well known as whaling, and that's when you go phishing for a limited pool of people. You want them big pocket dummies, the C-suite people, the ones who are too important for the end user security awareness training and obviously too smart to fall for a scam. If they weren't, why would they be so rich? So whaling, it's called. That is how it works, right? I'm pretty sure. The more money you have, it's because you're smarter. Watering holes or other fake websites modeled to look like the real thing. What's really popular these days is using ready-made stuff, ready-made templates. Google Forms, Microsoft Forms make it really easy to have a landing page with an official-looking URL that doesn't even necessarily gather anything sensitive right away. One of the really popular phishing attacks here on campus previously has been the job opportunity scam, right? You get an email that says, you want to make $400 a week, like walking dogs or something like that, or whatever weird stuff they come up with. That is not going to contain itself a malicious file because we have scrubbers and scanners at the perimeter. And it's not going to contain a stood up site, something that they did fly by night on Squarespace or wherever they happen to be hosting it, because of course we have URL scanners too. But if they do a Google form or a Microsoft form, what are we going to do? Block Google and Microsoft? The URL is Google or forms.google.com or forms.microsoft.com. So it's really easy, low effort investment, and they won't ask for anything particularly sensitive at first. Just your name and maybe where you bank and maybe a number to contact. It all seems perfectly fine. Again, it's that this isn't important information. I can hand this out to people. It's not a big deal. But as we'll talk about, well, I guess at this point, probably next time we meet this week, just the simple act of replying and landing on a fake website is enough because it tells the attackers something. It tells them their messages are getting through. you were dumb enough to click on the link, and so on, because they can, of course, see who's visiting their site. That's how the internet works. Fake pop-ups are actually still a thing, believe it or not. You might not believe it, but they are. The fake pop-ups. If you tend to browse in the wrong places or in the wrong way, you will still occasionally get the fake pop-ups being served up. The old fake AV is always a popular one. We are going to look at one of those, and so on. So those are still there. Well, we also have a new kid on the block when it comes to social engineering attacks, and that is deep fakes. Not that long ago, sorry, this is week 5. So 2 weeks ago, there was a successful social engineering attack. Some people were doing some impersonation, and they used AI voice changer in order to impersonate the voice of the CEO and call into the company and say, I am stuck in Vegas. I lost all my money at the table. Send me $9,000 so I can get home right now. And it sounded just like him because of the voice changer. We already have this being used in some places, right? Deep fakes to videos, right? Being used to impersonate other people. That's not a big thing yet because, again, this is normally a low investment, high reward type of attack. And that is often far more work than you ever need to do to have a successful attack in most of these. But it's getting easier and it's getting quicker. And we're going to have a problem with that. All right. So those are some, I guess, modes of social engineering attacks. But again, getting to different tactics. There are hard tactics and there are soft tactics. Hard tactics tend to be more focused on the self, what you want as the attacker, while soft tactics tend to be more focused on others, on the victim, right? So the hardest tactic of all is simply requesting. You just ask them to do it. It works shockingly a large number of times, right? You're sitting outside a building. It's got an electronic access control device. Somebody comes up and they say, hey, can you open this door for me? You're like, yeah, sure, buddy. You just ask. But that's a hard tactic. It focuses on you. It's what you want. You're asking them to do you a favor. Legitimating is like a request, but you're adding something to it to sort of justify the request. Like you say, hey, can you open this door for me? I forgot my badge today. You're adding some kind of verisimilitude to it. Coalition is a team up. You're teaming up with the victim. You say something like, hey, this is my first day here. I haven't been issued that would be a bad tactic. You say something like, this is my first day here. I left my badge on my desk. Could you maybe help me out if we can go in here together or something? Something like that. You're still making a request. It's still about you. But at that point, you're kind of recruiting them into your situation, your problem that you're having. Rational persuasion is probably the one I'm willing to bet all of you have probably heard 1,000 times. Rational persuasion is when you ask for something, but instead of just legitimating, giving a reason why you're asking, you try to convince them, or someone is trying to convince you that is the right thing to do. Something like, you're asking for somebody's password, and you say, well, actually, the beginning of the movie Hackers, 1995, if we didn't see that clip before, the beginning of the movie, he calls into the security guard, and he says that he has a report that's due and he needs to be able to remote into his machine in order to do it, or the Japanese CEO is going to ask him to quit Harry Carey. Rational persuasion, you're convincing them that it's the right thing to do. And we can go further on from there. I won't necessarily go through each of these because we're running low on time. But essentially, as we go down, socializing, as I said, making friends, you're kind of teaming up, you're building some kind of camaraderie. Exchange is your classic quid pro quo. Like if they're reticent about letting you into the building, say, can you scan me in? And they're like, we're not really supposed to do that. And you're like, well, all right, I understand. I tell you what, you let me in, I'll get back to my desk and coffee on me. Right? We'll get to know each other. You'll know I'm not a threat. Personal appeal is what you hear a lot in the scam baiter community, the tech support scam. And we'll actually, is anybody here already familiar with Kitboga? Oh, cool. And if you're not, you're in for a treat. We don't have time for it today. But next time, we're going to look at an attack. Kitboga is a scam baiter who baits tech support scams. Huh? Yeah. You hear personal appeals there a lot. Personal appeals are, please, my God, if I don't get this done, I'm going to lose my job. My dog is going to leave me. My car is going to break down. My house will be set on fire, and I will personally be held responsible for everything Bill Clinton has ever done. Consultation, similar to that, except you're saying, I have a problem. I need help. Please help me. You're the only one who can. And inspirational appeals is essentially where the victim is put on a pedestal. Like, you are the only one who can save us. This is all about you. If you choose not to, it's your choice. But I swear, you're the only one who can fix this situation. Now, of these, before I go to the next slide, and before we're done for today, which do you think is the most commonly used, and which do you think is the most successful? Just take a moment to think. Most commonly used, rational persuasion. Also, not very effective. Most effective, inspirational appeals. Not very often used. And this is because, as we talked about last week, our data and information seeking systems, our conversion into knowledge is flawed. We don't think so good as people, at least not in these kinds of terms. Because, we also talked about before, solipsism. We only have our own perspective. And from our perspective, we are rational beings. Almost, in some cases, some people consider themselves to be perfectly rational beings. You're not, I'm sorry to break it to you. But we think of ourselves that way because that's how we experience the world. Everything we experience is objective. And so for us, somebody rationalizing with us, and if we can just understand what's going on, that's all that's required. Understanding. And so how do we get understanding? With information. And so we'll give people information until they understand. But that's not really how people work. That's not really how even we work. We are far more inspired to act if it appeals to our better nature, if it appeals to our ego, right? Because everyone wants to be the good guy. Everyone wants to be helpful. And if we're the only one that can help and we can swoop in and save the day, most of us will. Most of us. So you'll hear people rationalizing with you all the time. Think about how often it's worked on you. Probably not very much. You probably do it to other people. It doesn't work on them either. Look at how common request is and how little it works. Sometimes it works, once in a while. Now, this is broken up into 3 different types of acquiescence, by the way. Resistance is the light bar. Resistance means they did it in this study, but they didn't really want to, and they really weren't willing to help out with anything else after that. You know, like if I were to request simply, hey, can you open this door for me? Most people would do it, but if after we were inside, if I was like, hey, I also don't have my key to get up to the penthouse. Can you help me out? Then they would say, oh, wait a second, who are you again? But then we have compliance, which means they did it, they felt okay about it, maybe they were able to help out a little bit more, but that's about it. The blue bar is what we really want, though. That's commitment. That's not only did they do the thing, but they were willing to continue to help us to achieve our eventual goal. Like, I'm impersonating IT. If I just asked, hey, can you let me in? Sure, they'd let me in. But if I was like, hey, can you open up the door to the data center? Maybe they would. But if after we were in the data center, I was like, all right, I've got some data I have to take off of these. Can you hold on to these external drives while I'm copying all this stuff off? Most would say, what? But if I said, hey, man, listen, sorry, I know it's the middle of the afternoon. Everyone's already at home. I know you're just a security guard. So maybe you don't know what's going on here. I just got called out. I was in bed and something in the data center has shit the bed. I got to get in there. They're not paying me overtime for this, right? This is in the service contract. I got to get in there and do it. Can I just get in there and out and make my way home? And maybe even really lay it on kind of thick, right? You know, I was a security guard once. I really respect what you guys do. It's a lot harder job than most people really, consider it to be, and so on and so forth. Well, sure. They'll let me into the building. They'll let me into the data center. They'll hold on to the drives while I'm copying the data. We'll exchange social media. We'll keep in touch, right? Be my best man at my wedding, right? So that's what you really want, is that blue bar. Those are the tactics that work, but they're the ones that are used least often. Because this is not how we see each other. That's not how we see ourselves. All right, take care, everybody. We will finish next time.